On this episode of Fail Succeed, I talk to Tom Edmunds. Tom Edmunds is a writer and film director, and he's just made his first feature film, Dead in a Week. Now, what's really interesting about this is that it's taken Tom 5 years to make this film. And, you think about the average film is 90 minutes long, and people think that just happens, right? But it's a long process. And when he started, he hadn't got any money to make the film. He didn't have any actors. All he had was an idea, a script, and a belief in his vision for the film. And through sheer force of will, he got this film made, and he got some Oscar-nominated superstars to be in this film. We talk about how he got those Oscar-nominated superstars to take part. We talk about assassins. We talk about suicide attempts. And we talk about the process of making that film and the lows that Tom went through and those moments when he thought it's definitely not going to happen. There's lots to get into in this. I think you're going to find it interesting and inspirational. So settle in, get comfortable, and I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Hello, Dom.
So, Tom, as you know, this podcast is about people who've achieved great things but have overcome massive obstacles on the way. And what most people don't understand is that to achieve anything great, you've got to wade through a whole load of crap to get there, right?
Yeah, definitely true.
So you've achieved something pretty special, which is making your first feature film. And I think that's a good place to start is for you to tell us a little bit about the film, what it's called, who's in it, what it's about, etc. And then we'll get stuck into the process of how you made that. And the sort of the adversity you overcame. So just tell us a bit about the film, what's it called, etc.
So the film's called Dead in a Week or Your Money Back. It's a black comedy about a young man in his late 20s who has tried to commit suicide 7 times without success when he meets an assassin and he ends up outsourcing his suicide to an assassin. And the assassin, who is played by Tom Wilkinson, he has his own reasons for wanting this guy dead. And the young guy is played by an actor called Aniron Barnard, who was in Dunkirk recently. And we've also got Christopher Eccleston, who plays the boss of the Assassins Guild. The idea is that assassins are somewhat unionized. And they have to make a certain quota over the year in order to get their assassin's license renewed. And Chris Eccleston plays Tom Wilkinson's boss. And Wilkinson is on the brink of retirement, desperate to stave off retirement to keep doing the job that he loves. I mean,
that's very kind of British dark comedy sounding film. And just for people who maybe aren't aware of who those actors are. Tom Wilkinson, is he Oscar nominated or is he won an Oscar?
He was Oscar nominated twice. He was Oscar nominated for Michael Clayton with George Clooney, Best Supporting Actor. Yeah, and he was also nominated for Best Supporting Actor for a film called In the Bedroom. But I guess he's most famous for he was fairly recently in Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. He was in The Full Monty, and so he's one of those actors. He's one of those actors that's just he's done a lot. He's been in a lot.
Christopher Eccleston, of course, was Doctor Who.
Yeah,
he's been in a lot of other films as well.
Chris Eccleston is one of those. He's a real sort of powerhouse British character actor. He was in Shallow Grave, which was Danny Boyle's first feature film, and an incredible film. And now my film is on IMDb under the names of those actors, and that's quite a thrilling thing to see.
Right. And I mean, I guess the big point of this is that this is a proper film, right? These are pretty big actors. So that's why I say this is achieving something pretty special, right? Because when you're starting out and you've got this idea that you want to be a filmmaker, the idea of having Oscar-nominated actors in your first feature film, and the guy who is Doctor Who, which is just an absolutely enormous show, that's a big deal.
You've got that ultimate success, I guess, of making the film, but along the road you have certain wins, I guess, and those certain successes that come in those moments. Now, those successes come at the end of quite a lot of rejection and quite a lot of failure, but those things, I mean, I remember so clearly the call to say that Tom Wilkinson had accepted the role, and that felt like an enormous win. I mean, that felt like a huge success. And
I bet.
yeah, it's the validation. You're constantly, in my business, I'm sure that it's the same across a lot of businesses. You're constantly trying to insulate your project from criticism through validation, through certain kind of key endorsements, I guess. Because actually, what you realize is that so many people really don't know what they're talking about. But if you can give them something to grasp onto that feels like the project is a success, or the project has been validated by people that they respect, then that's how you make these things happen. Or we talked a lot about reaching some sort of critical mass, and things like Tom Wilkinson coming on board. That was a huge, huge moment for us.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you make there about people looking for validation to get them to green light something themselves, and that's absolutely the same across every field. I think, if you look in a business sense, people look at, from my background in the startup world, people look at what's this person done before as an indicator of whether they're going to back them with investment. And, they look for a blue chip corporation on your CV, things like that. And actually that is a huge part of what drives that decision making. So yeah, that's the point about people not knowing what they're doing. I think that's a very fair comment.
Yeah, I think that also. I think what you also can do is that is if you can be endorsed by people that have some kind of more identifiable success. If you can say this person was successful and they have identified our project as being a project with potential, that's hugely reassuring for people. And people are looking for that sort of reassurance. People are extremely risk averse. I mean, definitely in my business, I'm sure in yours as well. People are naturally risk averse. I mean, so I used to work for Anthony Minghella, who directed The English Patient and Talented Mr. Ripley and Cold Mountain, and he would often say, you have to remember that people don't want to make films. No one loses their job by not making a film, by deciding to not make a film. People lose their job because they decide to make a film and it's not successful. So actually, it's just the whole industry is set up to be skeptical and to be risk averse. And that's a huge thing to overcome. But you have to understand that that's just the nature of the business.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you kind of think, imagine all the incredible projects that have been passed over because of that kind of thinking.
Oh my God. Yeah, huge, 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 huge. I mean, I look back at, what we've done in terms of making Dead in a Week, and I really think that actually the thing that has brought it into existence is sheer force of will. Ultimately, we've stuck to our guns and we have forced this film into existence. And I'm sure that, the thing about being a director, and I'm a writer-director, which is, probably even lonelier, is that you don't really work with other writer-directors. You'll do your thing and then you bring in your crew and, your cast, but you very rarely get the chance to work or alongside other directors. I'm sure that every director would say the same thing, that it's, you have to force these things into existence. No one is going to.
So it's super tough. I mean, that, and let's get into that a bit now. But the idea that, so you wrote and directed this film, but of course, making the film is a very small part. The actual filming of it is a very small part. So, maybe that's over in, what was it, like a month, 2 months?
Yeah. So we shot for 5 weeks, and they are 5 incredibly tough, intense weeks, but they are exactly what you've been working towards for what is years. I mean, I think that one of the key things, and again, I'm sure this is something that is applicable across other industries and other businesses, is the huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes and in the less visible moments. So it's really funny how the conversation changes. People would say to me, "What are you working on?" And I'd see that same person a year later and they'd say, "What are you working on?" And I'd say, "I'm still working on that film and trying to put it into production." And, that is an extremely difficult thing to just have like I say, the force of will, the confidence and the ambition to follow through on that, because it's, that process was 4 years.
Okay, let's get into this a bit, because I think this is going to be really interesting, that 4-year journey. And actually, of course, it's more than just those 4 years, but let's just go back. This wasn't the first film that you tried to make, was it?
No, exactly. I'd written another script that I thought was going to be my first film. And I think in retrospect, I think I was slightly naive. Just the nature of that project was very complicated. I had quite a good early win moment with that project, in that I wrote the script, I pitched it to a producer, they were interested in it, they read the script, which I'd written on spec. So that's for no money, just for my own, hopes and dreams. And they optioned that script, and they were very positive about it, and were attempting to put that film into production. So I then spent really 18 months, 2 years working, rewriting, that script with their involvement, which was fine. I was being paid for rewrites. I'd been paid for the option, but ultimately that was with a view to making a film.
Yeah. So let's, in that moment when your script gets optioned, and you must have felt on top of the world, and that must have been to you the success you've been dreaming of having, right? Tell us about that feeling.
Yeah, and also the thing was that I didn't hawk that script around. I was put in touch with a producer. The nature of that project was slightly singular, because I intended it to be made in Germany. And
yeah, tell us about the concept. Actually, that would be quite useful to hear.
Okay, so it's in Germany, as you know, Dom. They dub everything. Every film is dubbed. Now, if you're a very successful American actor, you will have one person in Germany to be your voice, and they will always do your voice. And that I found quite an extraordinary concept, one that we don't really appreciate or don't really know much about here. So I wrote a film about imagining what it was like to be the voice of a very successful American actor. And my film was called Ich bin Tom Cruise. And it was imagining a guy who had walked into a dubbing studio aged 22 to dub a relatively unknown American actor in a film called Risky Business.
So that didn't work out for a few reasons. How down were you about Ich bin Tom Cruise not working out? And did you think, is this ever going to happen? Am I ever going to make a film? Or did you think, no, I've just got to keep plugging away? Tell us about how down that got you.
Well, I think at the time, I think there was a couple of things there. I mean, listen, I was super down about it. I thought I'd wasted the best part of 2 years.
That's interesting, though. Just on that point about wasting 2 years of your life, that's what you thought then. And I guess, and maybe I suspect this will be the case now. You look back and go, no, that was not a waste at all, because it taught me a lot of things. It taught me the steps I have to take to get a film made, at least in part. Or do you still view it as a waste?
I still view it as a bit of a waste,
really?
To be honest.
Really? Okay.
I do. I think that there was I think the thing that was good then, or the thing that was positive then, that it was harder now, is the fact that I didn't have any dependents at that time. Um, and now I have a young family. I didn't have that at that time. And also, I was young. Like if I had been able to make it, been Tom Cruise, I would have been, making my first feature film, directing my first feature film, and I would have been, 30? And I would have made it in a foreign language, which would have been quite weird. But, I think that, it's a great time to fail. And that was a positive thing about that time. I was crushed that it didn't happen. But actually, I look back and I think I was too young, I think, at that time to think it wouldn't happen. To think, well, that idea of will this ever happen? No, I thought it would do.
That is actually, first of all, the trait of youth. But I think also you hear that from a lot of successful people, that there's just some inner belief that they are destined to do this. And whether that's kind of naivety or delusion, it kind of doesn't matter because it drives you on. And someone who didn't believe they were destined to do it would have given up after Ich bin Tom Cruise. And so and actually I think you're being a bit harsh on yourself to say it's a waste, because I think it's actually a pivotal kind of experience that has got you to the position you're in now.
I mean, yeah, there are definitely a lot of positive things that came out of that. I mean, for all that my saying that there's no achievement in writing a screenplay, the knowledge that I could write a screenplay, is huge, and there's definitely that has carried through. The confidence that I could get this done, and that actually the other confidence that actually what I do write is something that is, interesting and funny and of value.
Yeah. But again, that I hear that so often in the startup world, and I'm definitely guilty of it myself, because and it's human nature. You put yourself into a position where you start a project, and you're so bought into it, and there's so much riding your own sort of self-worth. You've told everyone you're going to make a film, and to then not make a film, you're ashamed, you're embarrassed, and you feel like you've wasted your time. And so of course you keep going, probably longer than you should. That's completely natural, and that's part of the process. So you made the short film, and then you obviously got in your mind you want to make another film.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I wanted to make another film, and I thought I would make a full length film. But actually, what was so lovely about the process with the short film, listen, which obviously had its own challenges, but what was so nice about it coming out the other side of it was that I had, two people in my producers, Dan and Nick, actually saying to me, "Look, this has gone well. This has been a great process. We want to do something with you." Which is a huge thing. I mean, the amount of times, like I say, being a writer director is a very solitary pursuit. Having someone saying, "We want you to do this. We will do this with you. If you provide us with the material, we will make it happen, or we will work with you to make it happen." That's again hugely validating, hugely reassuring, and very encouraging. And so they said that, and I said, "Okay, right, let me have a think." And then and actually, Dead in a Week came out of a conversation that I had with Nick, where I was having one idea, he was having a different idea, but we could see some common ground between the two, and that's what the germ of Dead in a Week was from.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting point you make about collaboration, because I think when you're a young guy, a lot of it is done on self-belief, which probably is overdone. Like you believe in yourself a little bit too much. I can say that from my own experience, and that doesn't mean that you're not capable and that you're not going to do something great. But the point is, it's only when you find out other people believe in you as well that you can then really start flying, I think, because trying to do it on your own, that's such a difficult journey. It's almost impossible. But when other people buy into you, that's just a massive thing.
Yeah, massive. If you're one person pushing it, that's extremely difficult. And if you are the person who is pushing it every single day, then you're going to get super, super tired and probably run out of steam. Whereas if you've got some people to share that with, then you're going to find that a lot easier.
So you decided to do the film Dead in a Week, and presumably when you started that, you had some ideas of what you considered would be a success for the film. I mean, did that go any further than we just want to make a film and that's a success, or what? Did you think more than that?
Yeah, I think the nature of these things is that the goalposts of success do shift of your expectations, and I think that very clearly that happened at the beginning of the process, where actually the conversation with Dan and Nick was about, Tom, can you go and write us a film that we could make for under £500,000? And I started to sketch out the idea for Dead in a Week, and very quickly it became clear that film was probably not going to be achievable, or very difficult to achieve at under £500,000. But the idea could possibly support a higher budget. So definitely our expectations of what that film would be, shifted as we were making it, or as we were developing the idea. And then, of course, listen, you have expectations and you have challenges every day, and those are more sort of procedural. And then it's
Yeah.
quite easy to determine, is that going to be successful or not? And then you have the more kind of hypothetical successes, where you start dreaming about reviews, or festivals or awards and all that
Yeah, yeah.
sort of ephemera.
So when you start making a film, and I guess this was maybe not so much your responsibility, but the first thing you've got to do once you've written the script is go out and raise money, right?
Yeah, there's a really difficult chicken and egg situation with a film, in that um, you know if you try and raise money, then everyone is going to want to know how they're going to get their money back, and really how people get their money back in film industry is by people going to see it. And what attracts people to go and see it? Well, it's actors. So but actors want to know that the film is happening, and then they want to know how much they're going to get paid for it. So it's a tricky one, where it's very difficult to raise finance without actors. It's very difficult to get actors without finance. So we definitely tried to, and this was a lot about us trying to validate the project within the industry. We tried to get actors first and finance second.
Yeah. So at that point, it's all basically driven by your script and the personalities of you and your two producers, right? Pulling favors or whatever, in your charm to be able to convince people we can make this happen. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and trying to give people confidence in the film. There's a slightly odd thing. I mean, this is I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but there's a slightly odd thing that happens in films that I think that we're now dealing with, is that you have a lot of people that say no to a project before people that say yes. And then, of course, the people that say yes are the people that you then end up working with. So what you've done is you've effectively insulated yourself with people that are on your side. You effectively sort of insulate yourself with your own echo chamber, because they are people that liked the script to begin with. So then when you then put it out at the end, you then have to, I guess, show it to people who maybe said no, and then you get upset that maybe they still don't like it, or they're still a bit skeptical about it or whatever. But actually the fact is that maybe they were never going to like it, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is, you remind me of something that gets talked about in the startup world a lot, which is, in the very beginning, you've got to surround yourself with people who believe totally in what you're doing, and just completely eliminate the naysayers from your day-to-day dealings, because any kind of doubt that creeps in those early stages can kill you, because it's just not what you need at that point. If you believe in the project, you've got to get it made, and it's so easy for people to say no, and most people will. But at that stage, you've got to ignore that. Sure, further down the line, you obviously need to take that feedback on board, but in those early days, it just doesn't help you really.
I think that's exactly the point. And I think that the key thing that you said there is that it's so easy to say no. It's so easy to say no, and it's so difficult to say yes. I said this actually to Tom Wilkinson, I think on the first or second day of working with him. I said to him, you know, how grateful I was that he said yes, because saying yes comes with a huge amount of discomfort. He's getting up at 5:30 in the morning, and we shot in February. It was extremely cold, to go and be uncomfortable for the day. I mean, why would you do that? It's so difficult to get people to leave their comfort zone, and that's what saying yes does. But of course, things don't happen by saying no. Things only happen by saying yes. You need those kind of personalities, the personalities of people that make things happen, and those will be the people that say yes to things.
Yeah. So I won't ask you if Tom Wilkinson was your first choice, because I'm sure he was. But I want to ask you about that sort of lead up to that process of casting, when you were going, right, we need to find some big names here to make this happen. Presumably, when you're starting that process, you're going, there's a tiny chance we actually get the people we want, and this is going to be really tough. Was that how it was?
Yeah, absolutely. The nature of that is that you shoot for the stars. I mean, literally, and and I guess by making those approaches, you are allowing yourself to dream that that chance will come true. Which obviously, that statistically, or that the likelihood is that this won't happen. Um, and that's for all number of reasons. So it's unlikely, but by making those approaches, you are daring to dream, and by daring to dream, I guess you are slightly beginning to think that it could happen. So of course, that when those things don't happen, it's disheartening. And if you, I mean, I think that one of the most difficult processes that we had was that we were given encouragement a lot of times, almost at every turn, saying, and normally this was from agents, and I can understand why they did it, but it's tricky, is that they would say, yes, we really love this project, we think it's exactly right for our client. And that's obviously encouraging to hear, and that fuels the hope, which then can mean that you end up wasting an awful lot of time waiting for an answer from that person, when actually, if they'd have said to you, look, we just don't think it's something that they're going to say yes to, then you can move on from that a lot quicker. You have a huge amount riding on the involvement of these people because the finance is dependent on it.
Yeah. So I mean, what you're saying there is that the agents weren't giving you a straight answer. They were going, oh, yeah.
It's not in their, what I realize is that it's not in their interest to, is that they're not going to say to you no, because in case the film is a big success and their client turns around to them and says, why wasn't I offered this? And they have to say, oh, actually you were, but we didn't think it was going to happen, or we didn't think it was the right thing. So it's not in their interest to say an outright no, or to say, it's very unlikely. They're actually, I realize that it's in their interest to be positive at that stage, just in case. Anyway, I mean, that's a slightly technical thing, but it does, again, like what it does is it fuels your optimism, and actually I think falsely fuels your optimism, because then it makes then those things it makes you feel like something that you knew was very unlikely. It makes you feel like it becomes more likely. And then when it then doesn't happen, your expectation has been raised. You've begun to believe that it's likely to happen, when in fact it was never likely.
Yeah. So I mean, the situation you're describing there sounds like real ups and downs, right? This is
Yeah.
kind of real roller coaster stuff, and not as much fun as Ronan Keating makes it sound in his song.
Yeah.
So I mean, you must have those highs are obviously amazing, but the lows are just they
Well,
kill you.
that we were talking earlier about um, feeling like these things, would it ever happen, and how you feel about that. Well, there were points where it really did not feel like it was going to happen, and also the other thing which is very frustrating, was not being able to understand why it wasn't happening, because actually, there was a huge amount of optimism about the script. People were reading it and saying, we think this is really good. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, because this is a business, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is going to say yes to it. But actually, you need one person to say yes to it in order for it to happen. So, we were sending it round to production companies and this kind of thing, and people were reading it and giving us really positive feedback. Ultimately, were not getting involved, but they could always justify why they were not getting involved, which a lot of the time had very little to do with the quality of the project. So optimism for the project was riding high, and yet actual, things being delivered, assets, being attracted to the project, was not really happening. And that left me, with a huge amount of questions, and a feeling of that maybe it wasn't going to happen, and I didn't understand why it wasn't going to happen.
So, but how do you deal with that? Did you go? I mean, were there any points where you said, "Okay, let's just give it up," or did you never get to that point?
No, I didn't. I mean, I started to work maybe on another thing. I started to work on another project, um, and I thought that maybe that was a bit of a hedge, and I think that probably that was a good thing to do, and I think that probably anyone who is really successful at this, people talk about having multiple projects in development at the same time, and really you don't know which one is going to go. Like I said earlier, and I did the same thing that I did on Ik Ben Tom Cruise, that I knew was the wrong thing to do, but I just naturally do it anyway. Is that I kind of put all my eggs in one basket, and I go, no, I need to focus on this. Well, on Dead in a Week, there was a point at which I was really unsure if it was going to happen. Just it was so difficult to get everything together. People, had reasons for saying no to things, um, and like I said, I wasn't quite understanding of why that was. It felt like, that we were getting positive feedback, but ultimately the answers were no. Um, and so I started to write something else. And, actually, I spoke with my wife, and she said, I don't know how you can have the energy to go and do this again. Because, when I tell her what was going on, she could see that we were getting positive feedback. And she was saying, from her perspective, it was, a thought that the industry wasn't really working, or wasn't working for us anyway, because we were getting, this positive feedback, but still ultimately the film wasn't happening. So she was like, you've written a really good script and it's not happening. How can you drum up the energy to go and write another script? And that was hard. That was a really hard moment.
Yeah, yeah, and presumably she was quite an important part of getting through that, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the support of your family is hugely, hugely important. Hugely important. These things, I mean, really in my job, but I'm sure this is true of every startup, is that if you have, a partner, a support structure who believe in you and believe in your project, then that makes the lows much easier to deal with. The difference between now Dead in a Week as opposed to Even Tom Cruise was that I have a young family, so there's more at stake. The failure feels bigger. It definitely feels bigger. There's definitely a lot more riding on it. It's not just me. It's there's a whole family that is around me now. So,
But was that helpful, or was it a hindrance? I mean, did it kind of make you work harder, or did you feel the pressure more and that affected you?
I think it's a double thing, really. I think that it's a little bit about your attitude. Ultimately, I think it's a positive thing. It makes you work harder. I mean, I had a conversation which I was having with a friend of mine who was a banker and became a novelist, and and I know that this must have resonated with him in some way, because he said the words back to me probably about 2 years after we'd had this conversation. And I had said to him that when you have kids, one of your kind of primary motivating factors was to make your children proud of you. And I said that, I guess, as a bit of an aside in a conversation we had, after he published his third novel, he said those words back to me. So I think you can't underestimate the motivating factor of having a family, the support it gives you, but also the motivation it gives you.
I mean, that's just fascinating stuff about that whole journey and process of getting it done. But ultimately, you got those guys all on board, and then I suppose the money is probably easier to raise. Not easy, but easier to kind of do when you've got those big names attached to it.
With those names attached, what you can do is you can start putting together, what you hope is a fairly accurate prediction about how the film will perform, and then based on those estimates, you can then go and raise money. We applied to a lot of the soft money options that there are, the British Film Institute and all this sort of stuff, and we were rejected by those things. And I don't necessarily think that was the wrong thing. Obviously, again, disappointing. Those things are big validatory factors, but I can understand. We were ultimately trying to make a film that is for an audience, so actually it should stand on its own 2 feet. There are a lot of people that are much more deserving of that soft money, I think, than I am. And so I was fine with that. But of course, there is definitely a frustration that your life's not easy. We have to go out and we have to raise this money rather than we're going to be given it by lottery funding or whatever.
But of course, all of those things are mini rejections, right? And that at some point it affects you, and it affects your thinking, and you kind of go, are people really going to want to see this? I'm not getting the backing. But on the other side, you also become a little bit immune to it. So it becomes less important when you get a rejection. You don't feel it as much. But there's definitely a kind of a turning point where that happens. And up until that happens, you take it all very personally. I mean, in my experience, at least. But I mean, now you're at the point where you say, yeah, you said it earlier. You said, yeah, people don't really know what they're talking about. And I think that's true. There's a lot of people who are wise after the fact, right? And they go, yeah, I mean, that was obviously going to be a massive hit. I could have told you that from the beginning. And the truth is, well, you can't really say that. The classic example that I've got in my mind is Simon Cowell turning down Take That, which, and you hear that about, I think it was Decca, the record label, who turned down the Beatles and said guitar music is on the way out. And now it seems so obvious that the Beatles, they're a massive band, and everyone would say, well, of course, who would turn them down? But it's not as simple as that.
No, and listen, I think that one thing that I feel like I've learned from this process doesn't mean that I'm going to, I'm going to be immune from it from now on. But I think that it's very easy to use exceptions to help you prove a rule that you want to prove. And I think that's dangerous. So, the thing is, people would say to us, oh, look at the Full Monty or whatever, especially with Tom Wilkinson being part of the Full Monty. I mean, first of all, no one knew that the Full Monty was going to be a huge success. I mean, not even the filmmakers. I mean, quite famously, the director really didn't think it was a particularly good film when he first was showing it. It just caught a moment and became this huge phenomenon. But that is the exception, and so because it's a very famous exception, it's one that people reach for. But you have to understand that that's an exception. That's not a typical situation. So you should be very, very careful about reaching for those things to support your argument.
Very good point. Very good point. So we get to the point where the film is done, and that can't have been an easy process. But so you had the cast and crew screening at the British Film Institute, and I came along to that. And I remember walking in, and that's a proper cinema, right? It's a big room with a big screen, and there were lots of people there. And I remember sitting down, and obviously I've known you a while, and I sat down and I thought to myself, please let this be good. Really, I thought this is going to be awful if it's just terrible, and because you're a friend, I don't want this to happen to you. And then, I mean, that very quickly, that feeling was it went away because people were just howling with laughter within the first kind of minute. So that must have felt amazing to you when you see it up on a big screen in front of a lot of people, many of whom didn't know you. Okay, a lot of them were involved in the project, but many of them didn't know you. And you see that, that must have just been a massive high.
Yeah. I mean, those screenings are fantastic, and I think that one of the things that I'm very aware of at the moment is that, and the thing that gives me a lot of pleasure is the fact that when we put the film in front of an audience, people react well to it. That's immensely satisfying. I mean, there's something that gives you a really clear kind of, I guess, narrative of the success is that when you step onto the set for the first day of shooting, and you look around, and there are, I don't know, 100 people. I don't know, maybe a few less, but I don't know. I mean, our credits are probably like 300 people strong. And so on the set, I don't know, you've got 80 people or something, and they're there because you sat at home on your own and typed some words onto a blank page. That's amazing. And then you take that then forward, and then you look on the screen, and first of all, like you say, you've got the audience reaction of people laughing, but also you see the work of all of those people that collaborated with you on that project represented on that screen. Everyone's hard work. That's amazingly satisfying. And that those people that have given up their time and are using their talent to the best of their ability, and they are pleased and proud of the project at the end of it. But it is satisfying if you get. I guess I've done a comedy, and the reaction to a comedy is fairly binary. People laugh or they don't laugh, and you're going to get a pretty quick read on that. So people were laughing. It's great.
Yeah. And that I don't think anyone should lose sight of the fact that that is a massive success in its own right. But of course, as soon as that happens, that feeling, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that feeling probably lasts a couple of days, and then you're back to, well, now we want to get it out there, and we're on to the next thing of kind of we've got to get it sold, and we've got to get it into cinemas, and we've got to get people to watch it. And so very quickly, that part of your success is behind you, and you're now onto the roller coaster again. And this, I say this all the time, success is not a linear thing, and from the outside it looks like it is, but you don't sit there a week later and go, well, I'm a massive success because people were laughing at my film last week. No, you're on to what's our next hurdle to overcome.
You're completely right. I did not sit there a week after the screening and go, wow, I've really succeeded. I was like, no, okay, how do we take this and do this? How do we build on this? And you reset the parameters for success. But what's frustrating is when you become less in control of those things.
Yeah. So let's just wrap things up here. But tell us what stage are we at now with the film? When are we going to see it? What happens next?
Yeah, so at the moment it's with the sales agents. They are selling it. It's sold fairly strongly, pretty strongly internationally. Um, it. I'm hoping that it will be out in some form in the autumn.
And is there a trailer or anything we can watch?
So, in fact, I'm going to be slightly late for a meeting where I've got to sign off the trailer. So there'll be a trailer soon, but not quite yet.
So thanks so much, Tom, and all the best with the film. And hopefully we'll see it soon. Thank you, Tom.
Cool. Thanks.